those things aren't being talked about, but there's such a huge gulf between where we are and where we need to be to reach our climate targets that something really does need to shift. Thank you.
Thanks, Alison. So moving on to April. April, what do you think are the key issues that the Environment and Climate Change Scrutiny Committee should address in its first year?
Sorry, it wouldn't let me unmute myself. Hi everyone. So I suppose this kind of plays into the problems that you that your group have correctly identified. It isn't actually for a candidate to pick and choose what is the emergency and what isn't the emergency, because in mainstream politics people get told what to do a lot of the time. And that's why we desperately need opposition on Manchester Council. So the first thing I would try and look at is the farcical nature of how this even became to be. And I would want to get experts on, I want evidence makers on, and I would also like voting rights for everyone that's been elected as a representative, because you can't have a reasonable and rational way of looking at things that are just bread and butter statistical issues when you're all in one party pocket sort of marking each other's homework. It's going to be really, really difficult to, as Alison says, address these things in the we need an alarmist nature to a lot of them, but there's a sort of patting on the back sort of approach that we get when we try and make a bit of progress. We need to make radical progress. So the first thing I would be is that I would actually listen to experts to tell me where that alarm comes from. Thanks.
Great. So Mandie, what do you think are the key issues that the Environment and Climate Change Scrutiny Committee should address in its first year?
Thanks. It's a bit weird this that you can't unmute yourself. I think that the committee should address itself to the same priorities that the whole council and the executive member for the environment should be addressing themselves. So if we know, if we look at where most of the city's carbon emissions come from, roughly it's a third from traffic and travel. Roughly, it's a third from our domestic buildings, and roughly it's a third from commercial buildings, industry, and so on. So that is a rough idea about where the focus ought to be. Within that, obviously, there are some real issues to scrutinise and to unpick. So, for example, when it comes to homes and buildings, I think when we did ask about this actually at the first subcommittee that we had for the pandemic on the climate emergency, we were talking about the role of planning, for example. That's extremely important, because it's how the city is planned and how homes and buildings are planned that gives the council, would give the council the power to make the changes, that the kind of changes that it might wish to make. And I also think that a further area for more detailed scrutiny is probably about the emissions that are related to consumption as well, because we all know that the consumption of the city and the consumption of the city residents form a large part of the overall total emissions. So although the City Council might not actually be able to directly affect it, there are things that can be done, and those are the kind of things that the committee ought to seek to unpick.
Great, thanks, Mandie. So when we asked for questions in advance, we got quite a few questions about the airport, so I think I should ask one of those whilst we're still at the early point. And the question that I would like to put to the candidates is this: it's, are you willing to constrain growth in air miles flown out of Manchester Airport, considering that its expansion would not be aligned with the city's climate goals? Okay, so so we don't always have people going in the same order. I'm just going to flip the order that from last time. So we'll go Mandie, then April, then Alison. So Mandie, are you willing to constrain growth in air miles flown out of Manchester Airport?
Thank you. Sorry, this mute button is a bit different from most of them. You probably all are already aware that obviously the airport is a very big issue for all of us. So you're probably already aware that the City Council did commission the Tyndall Centre to examine a report about the way that it should approach the airport, and the way that it did do that was by categorising the emissions that come from the airport in 3 different groups. Ones are the ones that can be attributable to the city, those that can be attributable to the accommodation, and those that are simply related to aviation. Now, very interestingly, what I discovered was that if you look at the ones to do with aviation, then the carbon emissions of actual Manchester City residents and businesses is actually far smaller than it would be if we were looking at a carbon budget which was equal to the same carbon budget as all of the other airports in the country. Now, I'm not saying that that is the right approach, but it's really important that the city is connected to the rest of the country. So if we're not going to have the airport, then we certainly need to have far better transport links to other parts of the country.
Okay, thanks. April, are you willing to constrain growth in air miles flown out of Manchester Airport?
It's already Lib Dem policy. We are already in our last manifesto, I think it was, we wanted to restrict the amount of flights, but I know in the 2019 manifesto we actually put forward a higher taxation for frequent flyers and people that were travelling internationally. But just looking at Manchester Airport in terms of local politics, I'll keep it short. What I'm worried about is this relationship between the airport more generally and the council, because obviously the council has faced so many cuts that at the time where we get this sort of cash cow, this dividend, it means that it's going to be very, very difficult for the council to say with a straight face climate emergency, and then on the other hand go, well, we need the money. So I think that I would really, really support the council in being a bit braver in how we recognise the fiscal gap in our budget, because I just don't think it's sustainable. And particularly with COVID, you know, we're not going to be getting money for another 3 years anyway. So it's going to cause, it's essentially created a cut in funding, which was completely unforeseen. So we need to kind of look at how the money's spent, but considering the council won't divest from the GM pension fund, I'm not entirely confident in how we bring that around.
Alison, would you constrain growth in air miles coming out of Manchester Airport?
Yes, again, the Green Party's policy is to be against expansion of airports. And so the answer to your question is a straight yes. There is a great problem with the finances, given that the 10 boroughs of Greater Manchester own more than half the shareholdings in Manchester Airport Group. But what bothers me is as we've sort of scrutinised what the council's done over the past year or so, and we've responded to some of the consultations, is this real sort of queasy dynamic between sort of thing that April was talking about, where we're going to get our money from, where we go with the talk of growth. It's the city centre and it's the airport. And at the same time, we're going to be this world leading city in, you know, climate initiatives. and the two just don't match up. And I was looking at the Manchester Climate Change annual report again from last year, and it says the city's carbon budget is based on the premise that emissions from flights departing the UK airports remains at 2018 levels. I mean, Manchester City Council has, I think quite rightly, gone for science-based budgets from the Tyndall Centre. That's great, but if you've got a target, you've got to stick to it. And the Tyndall Centre are saying that it's not going to be possible for Manchester to stay within its carbon budgets if the airport expands, you know, as predicted and as wished by the shareholders Manchester Airport Group. So I think that's one of the things that has to happen with the new committee. I think we need a review of what's going on at the airport. I think we need to talk very honestly about these issues, about the money. I mean, it's not, these are not easy issues. We know that, so as April said, it's not easy, but we have to talk about the gulf. Keep thinking about this gulf between where we are and where we need to be, and we have to be honest about it. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Alison. Before we go on to the next set of questions, I'd just like to say to candidates to make sure they're speaking kind of directly into their microphones. I think some people haven't always been able to pick that up. So carry on with your answers, but directly into the microphone. So another area that we had quite a lot of questions submitted about in advance, but feel free to add more, was of course active travel. And as you'll all be aware, in recent months, Manchester has seen some new infrastructure installed to promote active travel, such as the segregated cycleways. But the question that came through was to ask the candidates what additional changes they think can be made to encourage people out of their cars, both to improve road congestion and to combat air pollution. So we'll flip the order again, and we will start with April, and then we'll go Alison and Mandie. So April, what additional changes do you think can encourage people out of their cars? That's to April.
Hi. I don't drive. And I'll tell you what, I don't cycle much either, because it feels like you're playing with your own life in certain parts of Manchester. I have a disabled child, and the idea was that I was going to get a customised bike and I was going to cycle around South Manchester, and I was going to be proudly, you know, and green, travelling around with my little family. It is impossible. It is impossible. These networks are not even connected. We need a 15-minute 15-minute network city, right? That if it was a train, you wouldn't use that train because it doesn't go anywhere. They're not connected. But I just mean even on a hyper level, I think that we have looked at cycle lanes in the sort of most shortest way. So we don't particularly look at accessibility in terms of cycle lanes for cycles that need to be modified. And as a woman, I wouldn't use them as soon as it goes dark anyway, because of the amount of spikes in sexual attacks in my part of the neighbourhood. So the first things I would look at is accessibility and lighting.
Right. Okay, over to you then, Alison. What additional measures do you think can be made to encourage people out of their cars?
I'm quite keen to ask people what they think would get them out of their cars. I'm like April. I'm not really a cyclist. I went on my bike for the first time in ages the other day, and it was a very, very carefully picked out route through 2 parks, and I wheeled my bike across a road. But I asked this question of Sam Easterby-Smith, who's one of our candidates, this candidate for Withington, and he's given me a list of things about removing barriers and gates, making pavements better so that for people to walk on. Paint isn't infrastructure, ensure that bike lanes are segregated. Sorry, am I dropping out if I read? Because I don't really, this isn't sort of coming from my heart, because I'm too scared to do this. But these are the people who commute, who really, really use the bike lanes, and they know those things. So people like Sam should be asked, You know, what is it that's going to do that? But I do think that the issue we have is that we have to talk about cars as well, because unless we get the car usage down, I don't think many people will, you know, not that many people will be using bikes. And yes, it's a difficult, again, it's a difficult discussion. None of these discussions are easy, but we have to do, we're looking at low traffic neighbourhoods and that sort of thing. But we realise that some of those have been difficult for some people when, like in Levenshume, it's caused some controversy. So we really have to be connected. We have to try things out. We have to talk to people. These ideas have to come from communities, and so that people can say, well, yeah, then I would get on my bike if that was the case. I remember going to Holland when I was 21, and I was so amazed at the bike lanes. I mean, they were like, you know, paths for bikes, completely segregated from the road, and I travelled miles. I'd never been that far on a bike. It was wonderful. So I think there's a lot. I think there's a long way to go. And the B network, I'm assured by cyclists, isn't coming soon enough. It's good, but it's not coming soon enough. So should we have, you know, pop-up structures to divide cycle lanes off before we get to the actual solid structure? I don't know, but these are the discussions we need to have.
Thanks, Alison. So finally on this question, over to you, Mandie. What additional actions would you take to encourage people out of their cars?
Well, actually, my bike is my main method of transport and has been for many years. I do it because I really enjoy it and I love it. But I agree with both April and Alison. It is scary from time to time. I wouldn't say Manchester drivers, because I don't think it's just drivers just in Manchester. Drivers wherever you go, including actually in Holland, because I also cycle quite a lot in Holland. A lot of my family live there. Are quite scary. So the key is to have as much segregated infrastructure as you possibly can, and that is the objective from Andy Burnham and Chris Boardman's Made to Move document, which came out a couple of years ago. It is about segregating routes as much as you possibly can, in order to make them safe for people from 12 years old. It's a competent 12-year-old is the standard intended to be, but it isn't really. That is, you have to think about whether or not that is really feasible in a city like Manchester, which is a Victorian city. How much can you really retrofit so much of this you have to be, you know, you cannot simply do that. So we can do more things with low traffic neighbourhoods. But these things are extremely contentious, as I'm sure everybody knows, and they're not easy battles to win. It will take time. The Dutch began their journey to having the cycle paths that they've got in the 60s. So since Manchester, like every other city, has been going in a different direction for 50 years, it's not going to be resorted in a year. If we want to get more people out of their cars, and I think that that is a really desirable objective for many reasons, then I think we have to think just as much about public transport and about safe, clean public transport as we do about cycles. And then people will be walking, you know, to the bus stop and back from the bus stop. That is also, you know, that has got to be just as important a part of the overall package. And the other thing, of course, is that I live in South Manchester, which is flat, so cycling is relatively easy for people who live around where I do. And we also have lots of, you know, we've got the river paths and things people can go on. But that's not the case, is it, Alison, in Crumpsall? And you know, for people to cycle up to Crumpsall, they have to go a fairly steep route. It's well known that people's tendency to cycle on a day-to-day basis drops off very sharply once they've got to go over a gradient of more than 4%. So being realistic, public transport is going to be a much more feasible way of getting people out of their cars. And I would suggest that that is going to come down to reliability and price. And I'm extremely pleased that Andy Burnham has finally gone through the whole process, and that we are sorry, it's really difficult if somebody writes you a message on the chat when you're talking. So
okay, well let's wrap up at that point now, because in fact I think we're going to stay on active travel. So I've had another follow-up question, which is asking each candidate what they think of low traffic neighbourhoods, so sometimes known as LTNs, and how they see them working or not in our neighbourhoods. So let's go back to that original alphabetical order of Alison, April, then Mandie. So Alison, what do you think of low traffic neighbourhoods, and how do you see them working or not in our neighbourhoods?
Well, I think on paper, yes, they look like an extremely good idea, and I think we should work very, very hard to make them work. I think we need to find out what, I know that Levenshulme's the example I know where there was a lot of people who were upset about the routes that they said it would turn their roads into rat runs, or there were businesses that said they couldn't get deliveries if the roads were blocked off. And so I don't really know how all that came about, and therefore we'd need to look at that. But we have to try these things, and I think there's a lot to be said for putting up temporary ways of doing things, and then they can be changed around. I'm sure that's what the given wisdom is at the moment. But again, I think while there are so many cars, one of the things, but this isn't exactly low traffic neighbourhoods, but the cycle lane, the pop-up cycle lanes that were put up in Trafford, the complaint was that the tailbacks of cars were incredibly long. Well, we need to do something about the tailbacks of cars as well. Maybe it's difficult to get a low traffic neighbourhood while every houses have 2 cars, and everybody wants to use their car as much as possible. So I think we should be working towards, I was told the other day about Moss Side, where one of the councillors is working with some of the community groups to really look at how you can have a low traffic neighbourhood that would be acceptable to people. And I think it's quite a long and complex process to go through, but we need to go through it. Thanks.
Thanks, Alison. So over to you for that question, April. What do you think of low traffic neighbourhoods, and how do you see them working or not in our neighbourhoods?
Hi, so we're getting a scheme in Withington called Safer Roads Parsonage Road, because we have lots of fatalities here. And no, it's not always someone that's speeding. It's just by some boxes that have not been painted, or we've got a blind spot, but we just keep getting fatalities after fatalities and accidents. And this is a sleepy neighbourhood. It shouldn't be that way, So we're getting something similar, basically an LTN, but all in name. And I think it's because that there has been a difference in opinion on what's happened in Levenshulme, that the council probably don't want to say what it is actually going to be in our neighbourhood. And I suppose this is where I get a bit frustrated, because I don't want any fag packet policies being put forward that don't have civic planning in mind, that don't have user-led experience in mind, because then you get hostility to the cause. If you make people feel like they're being dragged along by some crazy greenies who have put a planter in the middle of the road, you're going to get hostility. They're going to move them. And I think that this is where it comes back to sort of joined up thinking. Go and find those experts. Go and find those people that know more than you. Find Sam. We're here. There's a cycle lobby that you can't shut them up. So go and talk to them. And I think you also need to address the community in itself. So somewhat street letters informing people why this is important. If you just change something, people don't like change. And if they don't understand it, or if they can't recognise it, they're going to fight it. So I want no more fag policies. I am supportive of the scheme, but only if it really understands the needs of the community and doesn't try to instruct the needs of the community. Thanks.
Thanks, April. So thirdly, over to you, Mandie. What do you think of low traffic neighbourhoods, and how do you see them working or not in our neighbourhoods?
Okay, just before I talk about low traffic neighbourhoods, I want to make a kind of point about the overall context of this, because people have said earlier on about reducing car use, and I personally think that is really, really important. But let's not forget that that's in a context where the present government, who are not represented around this table, have had policies that massively increase car use. So, for example, where there were policies in before that increased the car tax for the size of the car, that's now been abolished. So hence we've got this epidemic of SUVs, which to me doesn't make any sense in a city like Manchester, where basically the lanes aren't wide enough for two cars to pass in any case, let alone somebody on a bike and somebody on foot. And then so I just think that the other thing about this, all of this is about road safety, and that I don't know whether anybody else is aware of this, but the number of tickets nationally issued for road safety penalty has been cut down by, it's only about 25% of what it was in 2007. And this is because the motorist lobby is extremely powerful, and the present government is extremely susceptible to that. So that's the context, that's the national context in which we're working. So to move directly to low traffic neighbourhoods, I'm seeing Matthew's asking about political leadership. So I think this is really interesting, because I do have an additional role in our city council as the lead member for active travel, which is just a backbench role championing these causes, but it is because I'm interested in it. I was speaking to an officer the other day, and he pointed to me to an article in a transport magazine that said that policy officers on this are terrified to put forward these schemes because elected representatives do not want to take them forward because they are really scary, and you do take a lot of abuse for it. So in our area and in Levenshulme and in Manchester and again in Parsonage Road, we have had the political leadership. We are introducing these schemes. But I can tell you, as somebody who's just been through a consultation for the cycle lane in Chorlton development, of which part was what effectively would have been a low traffic neighbourhood, in order to address people's concerns in a previous consultation about diverted traffic, was that it's very, very controversial. People are not happy with it necessarily. So so therefore we just need to be very mindful that if we want to take people with us, we can't be dictating to people. We must listen, we must be flexible, we must try things and then adjust them if necessary. We must really do our best, bend over backwards to address everybody's concerns. But I do know that in some of the best low traffic neighbourhoods, once introduced, they are popular with local residents, and they do enable people to walk and cycle where otherwise they wouldn't. But you do need to take a very community-based approach.
Great, thanks, Mandie. I'm just going to ask one more question on active travel because it's an important area, and I'd like to bring up one question in particular that's come up in the chat just tonight, and that's from Maria M. And she's made a comment that she is disabled and she can't use the bike without a car. So my question from Maria to all the candidates is, firstly, if they could briefly comment on how public and active transport can best meet the needs of those with disabilities, and then just secondly, to very specifically ask a question that Maria M put, which is, do each of the candidates know how many disabled people are in Manchester? So the order that we're going to go for this, which I don't think we've done before, is April, then Mandie in the middle, and then thirdly with Alison. So so it's firstly comment on how active public transport can best meet the needs of disabled people, and to ask if you know how many disabled people are in Manchester. So April, firstly to you.
Hi Maria, you've really put me on the spot and I like that. I worked a carer for my mum and my dad, and I am a carer for my son. So, and I will tell you this, she hated public transport. She despised it. She really wanted to. She really, really wanted to. But she felt that there was trepidation that unless I was with her, or we could afford an extra bus ticket for someone else to come along and look after her, she felt abandoned or lost, because if she wasn't able to get out of a tram one day, she'd be scared. And it's that fear, right? And I think that that fear really, really needs to be addressed, because our infrastructure just hasn't caught up with the needs of disabilities. That's not me slagging off the council, that is nationwide. We have train stations that don't even have lifts. It's appalling and it shouldn't exist. And I'm really, really glad that you've asked this question, so thank you. I don't know how many disabled people are in the city. I hope that you can tell me. What I would say is I do find a lot of the problems, again, with disability and infrastructure to be about visible disability, right? So I've had people challenge my blue badge on my car because we don't look disabled enough. And I think that we could be doing way more about that. And I don't know if you've seen the not all disabled people are visible, and the adaptations of those signage. If we could get some of that on public transport, I would be really, really happy. Thank you.
Great, thanks April. So over to you, Mandie. How can public transport and active travel better meet the needs of disabled people, and how many disabled people are in Manchester?
Well, lots of things to say about that, really. Just short of 20% of the population in the city, well, in the conurbation, has a disability, but disabilities are not always physical. As April said, sometimes they're invisible. And we certainly do have some very foreign infrastructure. You can't access Levenshulme Station even yet, because it's overhead. And we know that some of our platforms are crowded, which for people who've got the kind of disability really fear being with lots of people are really very scary to use. So we've got a long way to go, like every other place in the city. But I also think that it's really important that there is a road infrastructure, and it's exactly people who need to use it, who want to be, who need to be in cars. Those are the reasons why those of us who don't need to ought to be making every effort to walk, cycle, or use public transport. And that way there would be far less congestion.
Thanks, Mandie. So over to you, Alison. How can public transport and active travel best meet the needs of disabled people? And did you want to comment on the number of disabled people in Manchester?
I'm afraid no, I don't know the number of disabled people in Manchester. I'm sorry about that. And if we're talking about the things we're learning this evening, then that's one of them, definitely for me. And also, I wouldn't presume to. I don't know all the what Maria knows. Sorry, is it Maria? Maria, sorry, knows about what's required on active travel and public transport. But what we would say in the Green Party is that we are certainly not against car use, blanket car use. Definitely, people who need it need to have access to it, need to have access to green taxis, electric taxis, that sort of thing. So I'm not knowledgeable in this area, and I don't think I should probably say any more than that, because I want to be truthful, really. So I'm going to leave it at that. Thank you.
Thanks, Alison. So we'll move on from the questions directly around active travel towards well, there were a few questions that came through in advance about working with others. So I'd like to ask all three candidates how they think the council should relate to activist groups organising campaigns around the climate emergency and other important issues. Now, for this question, we'll begin with Mandie, then we'll go to Alison, and then we'll finish up with April. So, Mandie, how do you think the council should relate to activist groups organising campaigns around the climate emergency and other important issues?
You might remember that when the council declared a climate emergency, one of the things that they said that we would do is work in every ward, and that's exactly what we've done in Chorlton Park ward. We have had a number of meetings with various different groups within our ward, and we are constantly engaged with those people in order to support them to identify the changes that they want to see in their areas and to bring those about if we possibly can. So, for example, in the ward where I live, I mean, obviously we've got a lot going on at the moment with active travel. It isn't just paint, by the way, as somebody said earlier in the chat, very far from it. But we've also got an awful lot going on in terms of nature-based solutions. So an awful lot of tree planting going on, for example, and wildflower planting in order to encourage biodiversity. And I think it's really important that you actually, it's important. We're quite action focused here, and I think that is really important.
Great. Okay, so next on to Alison. How do you think the council should work with activist groups and others campaigning around the climate emergency?
Right, well, Mandie referred to the declaration of the climate emergency, and Annette Wright, who was the councillor who put forward the motion, made a very impassioned speech, very heartfelt speech when she put the motion forward. And one of the things she said is, this is a city of activists. We don't just believe in the right to protest, we believe that protest is right. Now, that doesn't seem to me that doesn't feel as though that has happened over the past couple of years. And if we look at the trees not cars issue with the car parking and coats, etc. I don't want to go into that whole thing, but I don't feel that activists feel that they are listened to at the top level of the council. Now, I think there's possibly a difference between what goes on at ward level and what goes on at the top, the leadership, the executive. But I don't feel that Manchester City Council is a council that welcomes activism and people really stating a claim and making their claims felt. It doesn't feel like there's a way in to me. And I feel that that's something that the Green Party would definitely do if we get a councillor in May. That's something we'd be focusing on very, very much, is, yeah, opening things up to people, allowing people to speak at scrutiny committee meetings, not just allowing them, but encouraging them to. Just whole process up so that it isn't just scrutiny committees aren't just people going through the agenda and saying what marvelous things the council has done, but given the chance to really question it and really take them to task. I agree with Mandie, there are some good things going on at ward level. There are some wards where not that much is happening, but I really, if you're talking about activists, then I think the whole place needs to be much more open. Thank you.
Thanks, Alison. So thirdly, on to you, April. How do you think the council should relate to activist groups organising campaigns around the climate emergency and other important issues?
I just got thinking about something Alison said, so I'll jump to that and try and summarise it. But she was talking about how you sort of get people reading their agenda and thanking each other for the good work that they've done. I think the problem is that we only really see activism where there's a by-election, or it's a bit close here, or there's a lot of activists in this ward, or it's trendy to do so in Chorlton. There's lots and lots of wards that are left behind. So we only hear of the good stories, like a good story principle that the council does. The Liberal Democrat councillors have often stopped from speaking, stopped from asking questions. So and I just don't think it's a very clever strategy, because what it means is that a viewer or a resident or a voter or a potential activist looks at that and they think, God, this is boring. This is full of spin. I don't know this. I don't know this world. And actually, someone should be able to ask a question and not be spoken to in a way that is demeaning or tribalistic. And that's what happened with XR. We had executive members of the council saying that when XR protested in Deansgate, that their businesses were empty, that people were running them out of town. And then the independent businesses, predominantly independent businesses, said that didn't happen. And those businesses ended up being members of the cause. So I actually think this spinning that the council often does is actually a very poor strategy, because it turns people off, doesn't turn people on. But I wonder if that's the intention. I'm not sure.
Thanks, April. I think this leads us on to a kind of bunch of questions that we got in advance, which we're asking the candidates to hopefully reflect on what maybe hasn't gone as well so far in addressing the climate emergency, as well as the things that are pointing in a better direction. So the kind of maybe the best summary of this as a question is the following, which is, what is the main thing that Manchester Council has done wrong in the last 2 years on climate change, and what needs to change in the next 2 months? So we flipped around the order, but I'm going to go in the same order as I did last time. So that's a change in itself. So that will be Mandie, Alison and April again. So I'll repeat the question just once more, because it's got a couple of time frames in there, which I think it would be good to stick to. So what is the main thing that Manchester City Council has done wrong in the last 2 years on climate change, and what needs to change in the next 2 months? Over to you, Mandie.
Well, obviously the City Council's come in for a lot of stick about the Great Ancoats Street route. And so I think in hindsight, at the time, I was disappointed about that, and I think it would have been better if there had been a route through Great Ancoats Street that was able to be cycled down. Although I acknowledge that there was a parallel route. There is a parallel route being developed. So that was the reason. But nevertheless, I think we took an awful lot of unnecessary stick about it. But to be honest, looking about what the council should do in the future, I honestly think that the council is making a really good stab at this and should continue to do what it is doing. But the real difficulty that we're facing is actually the COVID emergency. So, for example, obviously we had a number of dedicated staff working on the climate emergency, but they have also had to turn their hands to some of the strategic issues that needed to be tackled in order to deal with COVID. That is simply the reality of it. And if this government had funded the City Council to the extent that it promised that it would do, then perhaps we would not be in that situation and would be able to move forward more quickly on some of the things that we've got the ambition to do.
Thanks, Mandie. So over to you, Alison. The main thing that Manchester Council has done wrong in the past 2 years on the climate emergency, and what needs to happen in the next 2 months, was the question that was asked to us.
Right, well, in the last 2 years, we've used 26% of our carbon budget. So, this can't all be laid directly at the door of the council, but that is something that has happened in the past 2 years that we need to be very mindful of, and it's now reduced the budget that we have now going forward. So yes, it's difficult because we've had COVID, but even before COVID, I don't think the council's response after that initial euphoric day on July, was it 17th, 2019, whatever it was, when we all stood up and clapped in the public gallery and everybody on the floor of the town hall clapped, when the declaration of the climate emergency, there just wasn't enough happening quickly enough. And so that was pre-COVID. So we need to, what I said at the beginning, we need to act as if it's an emergency. So we've got a good chance, so we've got another good chance now with this new committee coming up. But if we just go the same way as we did after the climate emergency, there's a bit of a shuffle, there's a bit of a reshuffle, and then it all settles down to business as usual, we're not on target, we're not on track. So whatever's been happening isn't enough. And it's as bleak as that, really. So we need to take this opportunity of the new committee will meet in May, and it will have to do better. It will have to do better at dragging the climate emergency centre stage and seeing it as just that. So I don't know what else we can do other than that. There can't be any excuses. If we think all the things we care about during COVID, like inequality and Black Lives Matter and all of those things that we care about, those things are only going to come under more and more and more pressure. They're going to get worse and worse and worse as the climate emergency hits. So whatever you care about is only going to get worse. And therefore, we have to have that kind of fire underneath us in order to tackle this.
Thanks, Alison. So, April, now it's your turn. What is the main thing that Manchester City Council has done wrong in the past 2 years, and what do we need to do in the next 2 months?
So it's not just been in the past 2 years, but I do feel like there's been a sort of apex to it that has been highlighted by Trees Not Manchester, New Islington, etc. And I just think it's about this sort of economic principle and policy of prioritising development, and how the council is trying to work out where it gets its money needs to be readjusted if they want to really understand what they signed up to in terms of that climate emergency bill. Because I'm not going to lie to you, the majority of people that refer to that motion are only Labour members. No one really sees the fruit of it. And I think that until you do that, until you can really feel that there has been a change, it just winds people up. It makes them feel like they're being told that they're wrong for caring about the climate emergency. So I guess what I would try to say is I would like there in the next 2 months to be some joined up thinking about how the overgeneration for luxury style living is hurting our city, how the lack of infrastructure to provide for these places needs to be readdressed. I'd like that researched, but more so, I would just like them to listen. I'd like to be not told what I think all the time. I'd like to be listened. I'd like to be brought in the room and be able to say what I want without being, called a traitor or whatever. All of these people on this call, everyone on this call has good intentions. There isn't a bad person here. And I think that it's really important to remind us of that. We have nuanced principles. So we have nuanced approaches to fixing really complex issues. And I'm sick of being treated like I'm a traitor or something. I would really like the council to listen to the majority of the people on this call, really. So yeah, thank you.
Thanks, April. I think that moves us nicely onto a question that's been put in the chat tonight from Jackie Haynes, which asks us about the Manchester Climate Change Agency. And Jackie's question, which I'm going to put to all 3 candidates, is how would they propose that the Manchester Climate Change Agency would be scrutinised if elected? So I don't think in order we've had for a while is April, then Mandie in the middle, then Alison. So April, how do you propose that the Manchester Climate Change Agency would be scrutinised if you were elected? I think April's still on mute.
Yeah, there we go. Hi. It's a really, really good question, and I'm not going to lie to you, I haven't given it that much thought, because it always, in my mind, was on the principle that there should be an independent voice and an evidence-based voice. So I would start there. That's pretty cut and dry, really. I think we have a problem, a cultural problem in our council, that people are marking each other's homework. There's quite a bit of cronyism going on. I would like there to be a trusted, independent voice on this issue, because it's too important for spin. Thanks.
Thanks, April. Mandie, how do you think Manchester Climate Agency should be scrutinised if you were elected?
I think that the climate change agency should be scrutinised in exactly the same way as it currently is, which is that they appear in front of the scrutiny committee, just as the Tyndall Centre. But can I just say something? The objective of this is surely to reduce carbon emissions, and all I'm hearing at the moment is an obsession with what goes on in scrutiny, and I find that we need to be talking about the outcomes here and about what we're actually doing in an action plan. But really, rather than simply what happens at a scrutiny committee meeting.
Thanks, Mandie. Alison, over to you. How do you think Manchester's Climate Change Agency should be scrutinised if you're elected?
Well, I worked at the university for many years looking at evaluation of science and technology projects. So I think evaluation is absolutely vital, independent evaluation. If we go back to last July, when it was the AGM of the Climate Change Partnership, was it? I can with these different words. I didn't enjoy that conference one bit, because it was simply a lot of again, sort of presentations on the great things that have been done in Manchester, and then some poor soul from the Climate Change Agency had to present the graphs and things that were in this annual report, saying how much of the budget had been used, and there was no questioning of it. I mean, I remember being at that meeting and putting in the chat, how about a 7th scrutiny committee? And at the end of it, Richard Leese was very scathing about that question. So we have to have scrutiny, we have to have evaluation, otherwise the target is meaningless. If we don't find out whether we're going to hit the targets, we're hitting the targets, we might as well not have them.
Thanks, Alison. And I've just got one follow-up question that's come through from about the Manchester Climate Change Agency, which is asking about their director, which I think is maybe currently being recruited again. There's been a few unsuccessful recruitments, but there will be a new director. So my question for the candidates is, what do you think should be the first action of that director when he or she comes into the role? We'll go Mandie, April, Alison for this one. Mandie, what should be the first act of the incoming director of the Manchester Climate Change Agency?
This is like a job interview, isn't it? Where you ask somebody what are they going to do in the first 100 days. I think that obviously the first thing that person needs to do is to get themselves fully abreast of where things are up to. So you clearly do a status update, if you like, and then view that against the evidence, and then against the objective, and then you would start to look at what were going to be the most important ways to spend your time going forward.
Great. April, what do you think should be the first act of when they eventually come the director of the Manchester Climate Change Agency?
Hi, I think it's pretty much in connection to what I said before. I think there needs to be an audit, essentially. I think that there's been a loss of faith in the determinations that have been made and targets not being hit. I think we need to have a reset, a reevaluation, and it needs to be done independently, but it needs to be done very quickly too. Not that we should rush work, but it is an emergency, as was covered at the start, and I don't want any more tinkering at the edges. It's really time to make some radical changes, but we can't do that unless we know where the dangers are, because otherwise we're fighting in the dark. So it has to be independent, and it has to be all-encompassing with how the council seeks to regenerate and expand and improve, because it can't be at the expense of our welfare, because then what's the point? Thanks.
Thanks, April. So, Alison, what do you think should be the first act of the director of the Manchester Climate Change Agency when they enter into the post?
Well, I see on the chat there's some discussion about them turning up to the new committee. How often the director turned up to the Neighbourhoods and Environment Scrutiny Committee. So they should definitely turn up to the new committee and be more visible, and talk to, yes, I agree that there should be an audit or an evaluation, but that they should also talk to other people, other groups, to see what they're thinking, what they're feeling about it, because there's obviously quite a lot of passionate feeling about what has and hasn't been achieved, and therefore I think they ought to be open and available to people to understand what the feeling is.
Thanks, Alison. So I think we've probably got time for 2 more questions. I'm going to ask one now, but do use the chat if you want to get the last question in. We're then going to kind of ask candidates what they think about the 3 commitments we've put out, Climate Emergency Manchester. And I think a reminder image of that has been put on the chat, as well as reflect on the most important things so far. But the penultimate question is one more, looking a bit more at the national and the international. And the question is, should Manchester City Council spend money or time on the COP26 conference in Glasgow? So an order that we haven't had for a while is the old alphabetical one. So we'll go Alison, April, Mandie. So Alison, do you think that Manchester City Council should spend money or time on the COP26 conference in Glasgow?
This isn't something I've thought about. So I suppose it depends what you mean by spend money and time. But yes, I think I think everybody ought to be involved with it. I think everybody needs to. I mean, we don't even know what it's going to be yet, do we? We don't know whether it's going to be in person or online or whatever. But yes, I would say, off the top of my head, yes, we should make some sort of representation, and that's something I think is a good question to think about. So thank you, whoever asked that one.
April, do you think Manchester City Council should spend money or time on the COP26 conference in Glasgow?
It should spend time, but not money. I think you absolutely need to point at where you need help and you need to demand it. But the money could be spent better than some death is my personal feeling.
Yeah. Thanks. Mandie, same question to you. Should Manchester City Council spend money or time on the COP26 conference in Glasgow?
Well, I first of all just need to make the pretty obvious point that time is money. One of our biggest costs is staff, so if we spend time, we're spending money. But that's fine with me. Of course, we should be represented. I think we are intending to go, and where the City Council should be looking at seeking to make networks is trying to meet with other cities and understanding where other cities are doing things that we could learn from, and sharing what we know about where we've been doing things well, and sharing those generously with other cities. So that's the obvious thing. But I wouldn't want anything to detract from the really important work that needs to be done at government and intergovernment level, because it's actually I know there's been a lot of people here been very, very keen to knock the council at every opportunity, but what I really want to say is that most of this stuff takes place at government level. Most of the decisions that the council has to make are within the context of the government, and the government also is making that in the context of how it seeks to influence other governments. So I just think that those are the things that we should be expecting from there. We should be expecting international leadership. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks. So one last question, and as we get in the end, I'd like candidates to keep it particularly concise. But it is then for just to briefly name one measure in another UK city that is currently being taken to address the climate emergency, that is not currently being addressed in Manchester, but they think could usefully be considered. So we'll begin with Mandie, then we'll go April, then we'll go Alison. So Mandie, can you name one measure in another UK city that's currently being addressed to deal with the climate emergency in Manchester that you think we should see in Manchester?
Well, I understand they're doing some very interesting work on food policy in Bristol, which I think we could usefully explore a little bit further. And I think that is possibly something that could be developed.
Right, okay, food policy in Bristol. April, another measure that's going on in another UK city that could be put into Manchester but isn't at the moment.
There's a lot going on with York at the moment, and I think that just collaborating ideas is simply how we can achieve a lot of these aims. There's they've learned to basically stop fighting one another, Labour and the Lib Dems, and have got together and made some really interesting things in city planning. Lots more vertical gardening, trying to address the food crisis there, as Mandie points out. I think that there's probably a lot of energy wasted on that sort of dynamic. So I would like there to be a fairer voting system so we can try and work a bit more together and have more incentive to do so.
Thanks, April. Alison, one measure that's currently being rolled out in a UK city that you think could come into Manchester but isn't there at the moment.
Right, I'm sorry, I'm going to be really naughty here and I'm going to go beyond UK because I really want to mention Amsterdam and donut economics, Kate Rayworth, because they're doing a fantastic job. I mean, there's 2 places in America that are doing it as well, but if we bring it as close to home as I can get, then Amsterdam is looking at this donut of the outer ring of what the planet can cope with, and the inner ring below which we should not be letting people fall. And that's the sweet spot in the middle of the donut where we can sustain, everybody's life can be sustained and within the limits of the planet. And it looks incredibly exciting. I would love Manchester to be able to have that kind of vision of either the donut or the 15-minute city that April mentioned. One of these ideas, like the Mayor of France is looking at the 15-minute city, where everything is available to us within a short distance, so we don't need to travel a long way. And I think it's that kind of level of vision that we really, really, really need to grasp, and to bring the circular economy and all those other things, like, I mean, something much closer to home, you know, the Preston model of looking at local procurement and all that kind of thing. But it's bigger than that. It's a holistic vision of our city and what it could be. And there's a lot of talk in the city council literature about Manchester being a world top flight city, a brilliant city. And I think it's a brilliant city, but I want us to be a brilliant city for the right reasons. I want us to be a brilliant city so that we can be saying, yes, we are cooperating with other cities, and we're bringing everybody up, and we're looking at things in this holistic way.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thanks, Alison. So that ends our questions tonight. We're near the end. There's just two more asks. One is of everybody who's here tonight, if you could just put in the chat what is the most important thing that you've heard tonight. Just stick that in the chat. And then whilst you're doing so, I just want to ask each of the 3 candidates, yes or no, do you agree to the 3 simple commitments that climate emergency has? If you've forgotten what they are, we've put a link in the Twitter, and we're asking these to all candidates who are standing for elections, not just the 3 of you who've joined us for the Hustings here tonight. So hopefully you can click on that Twitter link, remind yourself of the 3 commitments. It's a yes or no question. Do you agree to these 3 commitments? We'll go April, Mandie, Alison. So April, do you agree with these 3 simple commitments?
Yes.
Great, that was a yes or no answer. Brilliant, thanks. Mandie, do you agree with these 3 simple commitments?
I'm afraid I don't know what they are, because when I've just tried to click on the link, it's sent me off into a completely different direction. So I can't say.
Okay, I'll very quickly read them out for the benefit of you and everybody here. So the first is, every time a council officer or elected member mentions the objective of the city being 0 carbon by 2038, they should, in the same sentence, mention the progress against the city's emissions budget. The second is, all scrutiny committees should receive and properly consider as part of the agenda no less than twice in 2021 a report on the likely impacts of climate change. And the third is a standing item on the meeting of every executive about the city's emissions and what is being done to drive emissions down. So
I'm afraid I don't agree with those. I think they're really process obsessed and not likely to take us forward. I do completely agree that when people should be talking and very focused on zero carbon, but I want them to be focused on zero carbon, not focused on worrying about being tripped up.
Okay, thanks. Alison, do you agree with these 3 simple commitments?
I think I'd like to look at them and discuss them with my colleagues, to be honest. I had a slight panic there because when I clicked on the link, it sent me off camera. So I didn't quite know where I was lost in the ether. So I think if you're asking people to sign up to a sort of pledge, I think you do need to give them some chance to really look at what's being said there. So I'd be very, very glad to look at them.
Great, thanks, Alison. So that's nearly it. We've just asked some reflections on the most important thing they've heard tonight. As a very, very final thing before we go off, can I just ask the 3 candidates what they think is the most important thing they've heard tonight, and really just keep the answer to kind of 30 seconds. You know, just something that as you're reflecting on in the event that you'd like to kind of wrap up with. So we'll go Alison, April, or Mandie. We'll finish with that alphabetical order. Alison, just really quickly, what's the most important thing you've heard tonight?
Really that we need to work together and we need to listen to people.
Thanks. April, most important thing you've heard tonight?
The power of listening, the power of engagement. We need to be better at that, and that's not just a party thing, everyone does. And even when you think you know it all, you don't. And Alison's reminded me to read the theory of donut economics. So I've been given a lot of homework from this, so thank you.
Yeah, we always like a bit more reading. Mandie, what's the most important thing that you've heard here tonight?
I think the most important things that we've talked about are the overall objectives of the City Council's climate emergency and how we are to reach it. And I would very much want to urge us to stay very much focused on making progress and focusing towards reducing our emissions and working together to do that. Thanks.
Great. Well, thanks, Mandie. We're dead on 9, and talk of donuts is certainly making me peckish for a little bit of a snack. So really, like, a really big thank you to all 3 candidates. I know how much work and right into the evenings there is with local elections, so I really appreciate you all taking the time. And to everybody who's joined tonight, for those that you submitted questions in advance, or that put questions in the chat tonight. Yeah, it's really made it a good event, and I hope there's food for thought. We'll be posting a recording of this online, and we look forward to working with you all, no matter what the outcome of the election. So thanks, everybody. Have a good evening, and for those of you campaigning, a good rest of the campaign. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.